Kama Sutra Secrets of Life and Philosophy for the Modern World. Sex can be a spiritual thing.
I do a video about every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. It was taught in grade school as a scientific principle, but in sex it's certainly true in our country. There are people who push against, they push against negativity about sex, and then by using positive sex philosophy, and then they push back by trying to be controlling and take over communities and governments. And so there's kind of a battle, and it's over sex. And somebody said, if God is in your sex, then you got the wrong God. And so that's what my point is that sex should be a good thing to everybody. It should be pleasurable. Yes, there are safeguards to make it safer, but you need to calculate those risks. But to be honest with you, sex can be a spiritual thing, as it's been thought to be for thousands of years. For thousands of years, it's been something that you cultivate spiritually. So if you're a spiritual person, you could add having great sex as part of that being that you are. And like I said, it's separate from anything. It's you as an individual being. It's not in your relationship. Although relationship sex is great, sex can be just who you are, and that's a good place to start. And also, God should not be in your sex. If he is, you've got a puny God. You got the wrong God. So,
Kama Sutra Secrets of Life and Philosophy for the Modern World, the Great Sexual Repression.
So we have a great deal of sexual repression in this country. We'll talk about the 1950s and the 1960s, but it seems like in the year 2000s, with what happened with COVID and people being directly stuck in their homes for a couple of years, we have a sexual repression. You see it in religion, even though God should not be part of your sexual being. And the Bible and others do give good advice, but that's not really relevant for our day. And anybody who says it is just trying to repress you. And so sexual repression, I'm finding more and more prevalent and outwardly vocal. And it's really none of their business what you do. And I'm not sure why they consider themselves in that position, but they do. And it's something to watch out for. But you as a being can be sexually positive and enjoy your sexual activity to the ultimate, to the best you can. And it helps you develop a mature attitude about sex and sexuality. Okay, so behind the philosophy was, it's a striving to be a superior person. And there are 3 sections to this book that will talk about that. But I think that people strive to be educated in our society, and they strive to have good jobs, and they strive to, most of the time, enjoy their life, but they really don't strive to be great at sex, at least men, young men. So it's kind of generally kind of a generational thing too. I'll talk about that. But I thought I would put it together to say, about 7 centuries after this was accumulated, there was a religion started called Tantra. I don't want to overly talk about Tantra. I'll give I'll give an outline of it, but it's kind of something very strange to do today. There are people who follow it, especially swingers. But it's kind of an interesting idea, and I'll touch on it a little bit.
Kama Sutra Secrets of Life and Philosophy for the Modern World.
So there's a philosophy behind the Kama Sutra that many people don't grasp. The philosophy was, and in their time they were wealthy, and there were a great deal of men of wealth, and then they would have sons of young men of wealth, and so in their culture they would put very good at sex as a position that you would hold if you were a cultured young man. The book itself was generally for rich young men. Women have their sections of it, and it's for them too, usually mostly wealthy. You think about the caste system of India now, illegal, but now, and you think about back then it was mostly wealth that made the difference in their lives. And so the book was written and assembled for men of wealth who had to add good at sex for their repertoire. As a man, they were considered macho men who were overly masculine. But the book gives quite a bit of good advice towards that idea. And so we're going to jump into it a little bit deeper. But today we find that the wealth is not really why men should be good at sex. Men of all social standings and all economic standings should be good at sex. The information's out there. And instead, they become kind of socially inept by dealing with video machines and games and non-reality concepts. They're phones, things that are not in person. And so the philosophy was to be successful in life, you had to be good at sex. And also, there's some things for older men who have erection problems or whatever the problem may be on how to go forward in that sense. So kind of funny. I looked at a book, read a lot of a book, and it was about this thick, and it was the history of sex. And so, sex is very a staple of our civilization and of our species. Without it, we wouldn't have a species. So, the Kama Sutra was put together as writings of different men millennials ago, and then in the 4th century, a man started putting it together. There's very little is known about him. We're not going to center on him, but he put it together in such a grand way that it lasted for thousands of years more. Then in the 1800s, a man named Richard Burton, not the actor, but a man named Richard Burton, Sir Richard Burton, I think, he started translating them into our languages. He was a linguist. He was actually quite brilliant, and he was fixated with different kinds of sex, and so was his wife. There's a long history there of how he had to have a secret society because things were so bizarrely close to sex. Part of that comes back to the Crusades. So when the Crusades were going through, the Catholic Crusades, they would experience elegance in sex and the way that the country of India was putting together lifestyles. And so the lifestyles included sex. Now, what I find missing today is that men today don't think of great sex as part of a great man. They think of riches sometimes, and they're not necessarily good at sex. So India at that point were very liberal in the 4th century, and they were experimenting with sex, and this book helped them. However, they also had a philosophy that if you're going to be successful as a man, you have to be able to do great sex with someone, and you need to also. That's when riches and other things come in, and I'll talk about that philosophy in a couple of minutes. But I find that that's what's missing today. Too many males are just, even into their 30s, they're just like oriented with the fake reality of video games, and so they're lacking any skill when it comes to women or sex. And so this is where a book like the Kama Sutra can help, at least in its philosophies. So there's 3 different sections of the philosophy. The first one was Dharma, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And the other one is Arthra. I don't really want to spend too much time. It was the obligation of men to accumulate wealth for supporting their family. And then the last one is Kama, which is the way to sensual pleasure. So those are the 3 sections of the philosophy. And those are worth stating outwardly. I'll do each one as a section.